Hello, Claire. Hello, Jesse. Hello, Benton. Thank you for inviting me. And most of all, thank you for your dad, for his friendship. You know, there are people that say that they have 2 a.m. friends. I did have 2 a.m. friends. Your dad and your mom. I don't know that I could have made it through a very painful experience that your dad and mom literally saved me. It was a knock on the door, your door, at 2 a.m., maybe 2:30. There wasn't a question of why I was there. There wasn't a question of where I could stay. Could I have some coffee? Could I sleep in the bedroom? They opened their home to me for that evening and several evenings more. And I would not have, and I'm not being overly dramatic because I'm not, I would not have survived without your dad and your mom's kindness. So people really do have 2 a.m. friends, and I thank you for that. And every time I saw your dad, it didn't matter where it was, post office, the middle of the street, wherever it was when I happened to be home, absolutely talked about his Jesse and his Benton and his lovely wife, always. I love you three. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andy Haynes, and this message is for Claire and all the Wharton family. Jesse asked that we give some remembrances of Carl, and I've known Carl for 30 years or however long it was since he and Claire moved up here, and I don't want to spend too much time on this video, but the one thing I want to talk about is Jesse mentioned that Carl taught a lot of people a lot of stuff, and I learned something very valuable from Carl. Carl and I spent time going to a lot of basketball games. He had season tickets to the Clemson games just so that every couple of times a year he could go and see the UNC Tar Heels play, and he and I were fierce lovers of the Tar Heels, and would go down there and see some games. My problem was that I hated anybody that was not in favor of the Tar Heels, and during those games we were in Little John Coliseum, which was the heart of Clemson country, and Carl and I were probably one of about 4 people among 30,000, or whatever the capacity of the stadium was, that was pulling for the Clemson Tigers. And as I said, my point of view was I hated anybody that didn't like the Tar Heels. The lesson that Carl taught me was that although these people were around us who were cheering for the Tigers, Carl always made a point of making friends with the people that were around us, people that I really hated because I couldn't stand hearing them cheer every time the Tigers made a couple of points. But Carl developed a different attitude toward those people. He befriended those people, telling them that he was Carl Wharton, and told them that he was excited to be there at the stadium, and that just changed the whole tenor of our relationship with the people that were around us in the stadium. So he taught me not to be xenophobic, not to fear people or hate people that were different than I was and didn't ascribe to the same principles of loving the Tar Heels that I did, and that made our experience so much better. And I tried to carry that life lesson forward, not to be suspicious of people who didn't agree with me or did not somehow follow the same pattern that I was on. And that was a great gift that Carl gave me to understand different people and accept different people. And it was probably the best lesson that I learned of many knowing Carl. I loved him. He was a great human being, and all the things that were said at the memorial service were so appropriate as Carl being just a terrific fellow. And I'm happy to give a remembrance about my experiences with Carl to his family. God bless you, and God bless Carl. Thank you.
Hi, I'm George Connors. I am Carl's youngest sibling, because Carl is certainly part of the Connors family. I met Carl, I wouldn't say 1976 or something. The first time he came around to was dating my sister Claire, who is his long life's wife and mother of his children. But anyway, Carl, first time he came, I was very protective of my sister Claire because I always looked up to her and we were friends, and so she always sought my approval for whoever she brought home or dated. And so when Carl arrives, he's right out of the 1968 hippie book. I'm sure he would have been, you assume he'd been at Woodstock. But you know, I thought Carl was pretty cool early on. My parents were a little suspect of him dating their daughter. But anyway, but the story we heard today about him arriving the first time without underwear, that was quite the story. And every Christmas, they would give Carl a Brooks Brothers shirt. And Carl would always sneak around and offer me the shirt that he got because he said, I'll never wear these shirts. But I said, Carl, you're going to have to wear them every Christmas you come down here. But anyway, my mother did just, you know, the time she really connected with Carl and Carl became one of her favorites was when Jesse was born, and my mother went to help them out for the first 2 weeks, and we said, oh, you're going to be in Dillon, South Carolina in the middle of nowhere. What are you going to do? She says, well, I'm just there to help. But the fact that Carl would stay up and watch the Atlanta Braves game with her every night, and that he was a genuine fan, that's how they kind of connected. So that was a great story for us. So, but our children, we have 3 children, and they're younger. They don't line up with the Wharton children, but we've just always been close with Claire and Carl, and they brought their children when they were young to visit us. We live outside of Washington. We always do the Washington, D.C. Tourism with them, and that was always fun. And then when my children came along, we started coming here for Thanksgiving, and it is the best vacation or the best family time that my children will tell you of all the stuff they do every year. And we do 3 family events every year, but this is one of them, and this is the one they would never miss. And you know, Carl and Claire too, they just make you very welcome. And you know, I just love you, Carl. You were a great brother, great brother-in-law. And I always appreciated all the different dramas of the family that you put up with. And I know that you had a family with some dramas too, but I love them because I loved you. And I just love your children. They're just like my own children, and you have wonderful grandchildren. And I will always be a devoted brother of yours, and I'm going to miss you, but we will carry on the Thanksgiving tradition, I promise. We will have the same gathering, but I love you, Carl. Signing off.
So Carl started me on my dancing career. You know how Carl just had like one step, you know, that swing step, and that was all that he really did. But he started teaching me how to do that on the porch, obviously. Of course, it was the porch. And then I kind of took off from there. Now, Claire and Carl did go to dance class, and he really did learn some other steps, but it never changed. Carl just stood with his same step, and that was it, forever. And the rest of the story you guys know, because, you know, Dr. Sandy's just part of the family and, you know, took care of you all forever. So I know all of the secrets. Okay.
Don't have much to say about Brother Carl. He was always our go-to guy for the last 60 years. He was a wonderful fellow. We're always going to miss him. He left us a lot to be thankful for and remember him. And his life was his legacy, and it was a damn good one, and we're always going to miss you and always going to think about you and try to do better in our personal lives because we know you. Amen. Love you, brother.
I'm Chip Smith. I'm from Spartanburg, and we're here celebrating the life of Mr. Carl Wharton, whom I've known since about 1974. A good friend, a musicologist, and just an all-around great guy. We met in a bar, the New Way on Kennedy Street in Spartanburg. and remained friends until he passed away. And had a lot of friends, a lot of mutual friends, and just had some wonderful times during his life. Carl knew how to celebrate life. And as they said at the eulogy, you know, it wasn't so much about life, it was about living. And life is for the living, and Carl knew how to live. I miss him. It's good to see family and friends gather in his name, and you know, it's like Robert Earl King says, you know, the road goes on forever, but the party never ends. And I think that's the case tonight. And I'm just grateful to have known such a fine gentleman as Carl Wharton. Thank you.
Really, this was one of like Robin Hood's merry men, transported in time and place to the top of a hill somewhere in western North Carolina in the late 1980s. When our family moved to Tryon a few years later, just a half mile through the woods from the Wharton's home, Carl and his family became one of the great constants in my life. The image I had of this big, bearded, loud, laughing man stopped being of some sort of comic book character that we would see once a year or so. And in turn, Carl Wharton became one of the most important people that I've ever had in my life. Carl was just always there, but he was so much more than just around like a bad penny or an old piece of furniture. It was his infectious joy. It was the lessons and advice he gave. It was the sense that Carl was not simply living. It was that Carl was alive. And that's what sticks out to me. Carl took us sledding. We went on hikes. We had squirt gun fights. We just did stuff all the time. And I think that he liked it more than we did. When I think of Carl, I think of joy. Carl was at every soccer game, but not simply to cheer us on or motivate us with, how should I say, his colorful language. He was analyzing the game so that later when like Brazil or the U.S. women's national team was on TV, he would call us into that TV room and remind us to always be moving, to always have our heads up, to always be communicating with one another. When I think of Carl, I'm reminded to pay attention. Carl was there when we got in trouble. And yes, we got in trouble. He would tower over us and yell. Well, he'd yell. He'd say, "God, boys, y'all need to quit up." Do you know how much I'm going to have to hear from your mothers because of this? He would give us the business. But I always knew that it was because he cared, because he loved us, and because he wanted the best from us. When I think of Carl, I'm reminded to always be the very best version of myself that I can be. Before I went to college, he pulled me aside and said, "Osmosis. It's science. Here is my one piece of advice to you. I don't care how hungover you are, you go to class. You might not even take any notes, but you might learn something. Something might stick in your brain just because you're there. Show up." When I think of Carl, I'm reminded to show up. I think I can speak for many of us gathered here by saying that I have probably drank many times my body weight in Carl's Red Stripe beer. And I probably owe the Wharton household a small fortune for all of the food that I've eaten in that house. Carl would sometimes jokingly complain about us eating him out of house and home, but it was plain to see that he was more happy that we were around. If sharing beer or Slim Jims or delicious smoked meat or whatever brought people around, Carl was happy to share. When I think of Carl Wharton, I'm reminded to share. Years later, Carl would pull me aside and say, "Son, when are you going to marry that girl? She is way too pretty for you, and your mother will not stop talking about having grandchildren." When I think of Carl, I'm reminded that love is the most important emotion that we can experience. Don't hesitate. When you find love, you go for it. This was Carl's way. He would laugh, he would cuss, he would make a fuss, but he loved people and he wanted the very best for all of us. Since Carl's death, I have learned more about how Carl cared for people, about how he helped people in whatever community that he was in. Friends, family, thank you for being here today. I hope that as we listen to Carl's family and friends, as we talk to one another about this amazing man, that we can celebrate his life, honor his memory, and hold him in our hearts so that his legacy stays with us until we see him again.
I recently heard a wise man quote my father in saying, "If you want to look important, you wear a white shirt." And if you know me, you know I'm long-winded, so I'll pre-apologize. Watson Carl Wharton was born November 27th, 1949, to unknown parents. Lovingly adopted by Dr. Watson Wharton and Ethel Wharton of Smithfield, North Carolina, my father lived his childhood in a quaint little town, his parents and his sister, Emily. An avid lover of sports, Carl, as he would be called, was active in football, basketball, and track throughout high school. Injuries late in high school prevented him from further participation, and soon after, the Carl Wharton that many of the folks here today knew so well would begin to evolve. Naturally, I think of my father's story in the context of my own. I was born in Dillon, South Carolina. Technically, the hospital is in Darlington. Amongst the very cotton fields my father worked each day and each harvest. If you asked him, my father would say he was a cotton farm consultant. This love of farming developed in the early 70s as he neared the end of his time at Wofford College, graduated in 72. And as he neared the end of his time with a bachelor's in history. But post-college, Carl would move to Boiling Springs amongst some of the more interesting characters of my young life, and I'm delighted to see so many of them here today. Upon managing to gain the attention of the lovely Claire Dorgan Connors, a student at Converse College, Carl and his hippie self carried on as a plumber until his opportunity to move to Dillon began his love affair with cotton. I imagine at the time Carl was ready to follow his true hippie heart to work the land and managed to talk my mother into coming along with him to live in a tar paper shack on the edge of one of the fields. By the time my sister and I were born, they upgraded to a lovely farmhouse on the edge of a pond, and life was good. Our family moved to Tryon in 1986, and Gillette Woods would be our home from then to now. The home at Thousand Pines was a major undertaking, a project for my father, who secured the closed-down property after more than a year of attempts. To say that one of 5,000 Pines Lane would be a fixture of our past would be quite an understatement. But in and of itself, it was a statement of my father. He appreciated things made or created well before its time, and he wanted to save them. Sometimes this would translate to the real world poetically, yet other times it would seem like my father was just not willing to accept that his lawnmower or even his daily vehicle were no longer fit for proper use. But our home felt different. My father was in real estate at the time and had many updates made to the home when we moved in. So many people remember the porch, countless memories made there over the decades of friends, food, music, libations. I clearly remember the many times I fell through the open boards of the porch as Dad was mid-construction, and I rode around in my three-wheeler falling through the boards below the deck. I thought it was hilarious. And as projects rolled on, the home remained a staple of my father's philosophy. The doors were always open. And that's how I remember my father most, rolling about town, waving or saying hello to every soul he came across, zero regard for class, race, religion. I went to zoning meetings occasionally with my father and watched as he listened silently, intently, and at just the right moment would rise, and add a sincerely well thought out question that for all intents and purposes would pertain to the person on the other side of the property line. In the years of the old brown Jeep Wagoneer, I was with my father while we picked up hitchhikers, safely got them to their destination, gave rides to neighbors in need, or drove entire soccer teams worth of kids piled into Clemson games. Carl loved to be a definitive neighbor to the people of Tryon. And from that time, I can remember up until his final days on this cosmic plane. His doors were always open. His judgments always laid to the side. He never talked negatively about others, no matter their background. I was constantly amazed at how my father commanded all this respect from everyone that he encountered, and later would realize that he was giving so much respect to everyone he met that it was always returned wholeheartedly. His hand was the first to extend yours. Honesty was a pillar of my father's being, less because of some moral hierarchy and more because of his blunt reactions, strong opinions, and unfiltered truths. He was simply not great at lying, and he would always cut to the chase and give you a very straightforward answer, whether you were expecting it or not. I was 7 years old, and I would always fall asleep in my parents' bed. One night, my dad came up and laid in the bed next to me and asked if he could talk to me about something. I sat up and listened as my father did his best to explain what a brain tumor was and the type of surgery he'd be going into the next day at the hospital. He explained how the doctor would have to cut open his skull in order to get the tumor out, and that there was a slight chance it may have a lasting effect on my father's motor skills, or he could die. He didn't sugarcoat it, and I know that was because if something was going to happen, he wanted me to hear that from him. The reality of your father, someone who always seemed so strong man and the backbone of our family, being incapacitated after the surgery, staples lining the back of his skull, and lacking the ability to walk up the stairs on his own accord was something that seemed to have a lasting effect on me. My mother was always a rock when left with a task at need. She was our angel while Carl attempted to heal over the course of many months with no ability to operate heavy machinery or go to work. My father lost hearing in his right ear, and at that time would begin to start showing the left-sided smile we all came to know and love for the past 30 years. Carl would heal. He would reclaim his strongman title, and after a number of strenuous years, changing his career and eventually founding Thousand Pines Company, the business provided my father with a channel to help others. As a landlord, Carl was not the type to throw folks into the street and was constantly on evening missions to make sure an elderly woman had heat in her apartment, or that the gentleman that locked himself out could get back in so that his dog wasn't left inside. And after a long day of landlord duties, Carl would come home, enact a routine that became the staple of not only who he was, but even who I am. Dad's first move upon returning home was usually to set into motion his cooking ritual, whether bringing groceries in, pulling seasonings out by the mini onto the kitchen counter, most likely pulling a cold beer from the outdoor fridge, and then he would lean under the television, touch his stereo, walk out to his beloved porch to loud music. And with music filling the hills of Gillette Woods, as Dad would get ready to start the grill, and he'd come up to me, pick out his favorite part of the song, or at least that week's favorite part, and he'd lean in and he'd be like, "Do you hear that? Do you hear that bass line? And he had form. I mean, he would lean into it. He'd, assume this rock star position and deliberately in my personal space, directly in my face. And his eyes were fully possessed by music. As a music theory and composition minor myself, I can still say to this day my father had some of the biggest ears of anyone I ever met. He listened to every part of the song or a band and appreciated fully the talents, unifying elements of a group of musicians collectively creating meaningful music. It It was never limited to one genre. My father introduced me to Miles Davis as much as he introduced me to Jerry Garcia, or Taj Mahal, or Stevie Ray Vaughan, or Duane Allman. Food and music. These were Carl's passions, his escape, his happy place. The man who lived upon a high hill under that Blue Ridge mountain sky would teleport himself at this exact time of the day on a regular basis. And he would be blissfully lost in that special moment out on the porch at 105 Thousand Pines Lane. This happy yet dangerous combination would later take my father for a 25-year ride as founder and a key force in the Blue Ridge Barbecue and Music Festival. From the early years of bouncing between Harmon Field and Fence, I'd ride amongst the event in the golf cart and check on every cooker, every cook site, every judge's area, and every cooler with a red stripe. Carl would be out of pocket for literally a week or more, days on end, from dusk to dawn, giving every bit of his attention and efforts to this cause that was drenched in his most primal passions, cooking and music. It's no surprise the son looks up to his father so purely, unwaveringly. Fathers are their sons' heroes. But for anyone who knows me, they know that these passions bled through into my very being, my very purpose in life, to share in music and community, to give my all to helping others embark in that sacred communion. The first time I heard the term folk legend, it was used by someone to explain my father to me in the eyes of his friends. This larger-than-life character whose stories felt like folk tales and passion for people, friends, and life felt like a poem. I remember talking about Weather Report, the band, with Bill Fletcher, and him turning to me and saying, "Damn, this is cool, man." I mean, I knew you came from good pedigree. And that was indeed my luck, my blessing. In the first year of cancer, everything sucked. Cancer sucks. Chemo and radiation take their toll on their patients. You hope they'll kill the cancer before they kill your loved one. We actually had 2 cancer scares, and I thank God every day for my mother's continued health after the tumor found in her breast. But on the other side of the first all clear after treatment is this bright, shining desire to live as much as you possibly can. Our family made it a mission to spend as much time, as many holidays as we could together. These last few years, knowing that this invisible enemy was omnipresent, gave us a sense of urgency to go, to do. And we did. And we did up until the very end. With my father. At Thousand Pines Lane. We had a lot of time to discuss with Dad what he wanted after he was gone. He wanted to be cremated. He wanted his ashes spread in the Green River Narrows. Dad was there in college with a group of friends and climbed down to the water and got a little too close to one of the worst sections. If you're not aware, the Narrows are internationally known for their difficulty and overall level of danger. Well, he fell in. And luckily, he was pulled towards the only eddy before a rapid that would ride him to certain death. His friends had to tie their clothes together. Carl had to rappel up a rock wall back to safety, and upon telling their geology teacher this story when returning to school, he replied, "Carl, it's March 26th, 1971. And I want you to remember this is the first day of the rest of your life, because you should have died." And as my father told my sister and I this story, all I could think is how lucky we've been to have had him for this long. I remained grateful after his brain tumor, and I remain grateful to have been by his side for his last breath. We should all be glad And we should be happy that we were there to experience some of that life with Carl Wharton. Folk legend, barbecue aficionado, an avid music lover, and the best father anyone could hope for. I want to thank you all for being here in the hog heaven.
Ben, thank you. That was absolutely wonderful. My name is Coy Ray, and I am Carl's brother-in-law. My wife, Grazier, and Claire are sisters. And so they were so kind to ask me to be part of this today. Son, brother, husband, father, grandfather, uncle, brother-in-law, hippie, barbecue pitmaster, moonshine aficionado, and a lifelong Tar Heel fan. That was Carl Wharton. Many adjectives can describe Carl, but the one adjective that I would like to say, as evidenced by all of y'all being here, is a friend. We all have stories about Carl. We could probably be here till midnight tonight. Boy, there's some good ones. I tell you what, and over the years they've gotten better. I remember the first time I really realized who Carl was. He was a couple years ahead of me at Wofford, and he was riding around in a Land Rover that was a convertible. Now, I'm not sure how it was convertible. I think they took a chainsaw and cut the top off. But Carl was in it. My sister, Cappy, introduced Claire and Carl. I know that sounds a bit strange, but I'm so glad that Carl has been a part of my life, and I really appreciate it, and I did appreciate it from early on. Carl and I could not have been more opposite. Me, a banker, wearing three-piece suits and working in Charlotte, and Carl, a cotton farmer, sometimes plumber. Grazier and Claire's family were from Alabama. They couldn't quite understand Carl. When I visited, the housekeeper there was kind enough to wash my clothes. When Carl visited on his first trip, the maid came to Claire and Grazier's mother and said, "I've washed Carl's jeans, I washed his t-shirt and his socks, but no underwear." So Abby Connors approached Carl and said, "Carl, we'll be glad to wash your underwear." He said, "Miss Connors, I don't wear underwear." Oh, let's flash forward a few years. Carl and I realized that we really were really different, but not that different. We started to act more like brothers than in-laws. We started spending more time in Tryon. Our children were about the same ages, so it was natural for us to be up here. I remember when Carl, and Benton mentioned this, had his first surgery in Spartanburg. Claire called me and said that Carl has a tumor, and can you come to Spartanburg? So I jumped in the car, came to Spartanburg, and I walked into the hospital room about the time the doctor and one of his nurses walked in. And they were asking all the prerequisite questions about family history. Did your father have high blood pressure? No. Did your mother have high blood pressure? No. Diabetes runs in your family? No. All the questions that he answered. Finally, they walked out. I said, "Carl, you're adopted." He said, "I know that, but they don't." Oh, me. Oh, me. Having children that were close in age really did make it fun for us to come to the Wharton's house. My children absolutely, and they would attest to this, loved to come to the Whartons. You never knew what to expect, and they said it was always like going to camp. As our children grew older and the Whartons moved to Thousand Pines, it was always a treat to visit. Thanksgiving particularly was special, and absolutely we've been doing it for 34 plus years. Carl loved to cook, and I do believe every cooking utensil, pot, cooker, was on his porch. I don't believe he ever washed his hands. And he licked his fingers as he cooked and shared tasty morsels with all others who happened to be standing nearby. Now, I can promise you, Trevor and I, we'd just run out, we'd just look at each other and go, oh, my Lord, Carl, eating, hatching, try a little bit of this. That was Carl. Now, Carl thought he was an authority on many issues, politics. Well, I'll tell you right now, we agreed not to disagree, and disagree we did not. We just thought differently on that, so we left it alone. Carl was a Tar Heel basketball fanatic. He felt like he knew more than Dean Smith, and absolutely thought old Roy made the best decisions and then the worst decisions in the same game ever. He professed to know a little bit about cowboy boots, and this is a good one. Our son Copeland was dating a young lady from Houston. Lauren made her first trip to Tryon before they were married. We were sitting out on Carl's porch, and she remarked to Carl, "Carl, those are some very nice looking cowboy boots." He said, "Yes, they're Lucchese's, the best that ever made." She just kind of shook her head and said, "Well, that's nice, Carl." So a few minutes later, she looked at Carl and said, "Carl, I'm from Texas. I know cowboy boots, and they are not Lucchese boots." He said, "Yeah, I know. He said, "They came from Lebo's or the actual shoe outlet now." As Benton mentioned, Carl loved music, and I'll tell you, I learned to appreciate music from Carl, and really, it ranged from Billy Stewart to Marshall Tucker, Uncle Walt's band, Grateful Dead, Steve Miller, Keb Mo, and everything in between. And I just loved coming up here and just listen to music with Carl and sit on his beloved porch, because it was wonderful. I'll close by thanking all of you coming to pay tribute to Carl today. We spent a good bit of time with Carl and Claire over the last several months before his death. The last weekend of his life, we were sitting on the porch having a beer, and there were 5 women in the kitchen, all talking and drinking wine at the same time. I asked Carl, "Are you eating anything?" He said, "Well, it just doesn't taste right." I said, "Well, Carl, you need to keep eating." He said, "Well, you know, I'm going to have to start cooking again. 5 women are in that kitchen, not one of them can cook as well as I can." Carl and I did get one thing right, if nothing else. We married the right people. Certainly, Claire, you've been a wonderful, wonderful wife, mother, grandmother, and caregiver. Benton, Jesse, Jessica, Trevor, Brittany, all the time that you spent with Carl over the last several months and making him laugh, we all cried, and made it just special time for him. Also, the grandboys, Holden, Townsend, Everett, Alistair, he loved you very, very much, and y'all were all the apple of his eye. And lastly, I'd like to thank Dr. Sandy. Dr. Sandy, you have been a friend for years and years, and you have just been so wonderful to all of us, particularly the Wharton family. Carl, I will miss you. We were polar opposites, and they do attract. And brother, I will always love you, and thank you for being such a special part of my life. Thank you.
They didn't tell me the order, so I had to wait for Claire to point at me, which I just did. I'm Kate, and I used to live here a long time ago. I know some of you I don't know. But I was telling Claire and Carl this about a couple weeks before we lost him, when I was down here for about a week to spend with him. This is our 30th anniversary. We met, and Benton and Jesse, 30 years ago when I first moved down here. And man, I tell you what, they adopted me just like that. I went to that first Thanksgiving that I had in Tryon. My God, it was like oyster dressing. I'd never eaten it before. It was amazing. It's always been amazing. But here's the thing about Carl, and I know when I say this, you all are going to recognize it. Anytime I would walk into the house or on the porch or wherever he was, even if he knew I was coming, Kate! Yeah. Right? Exclamation points. So glad to see me. So glad to see each of you. Always hollered out your name, made you feel just right at home. I've been thinking a lot the last few years, and I've written about it some, about the difference between life and living. You know, life, it's like this big amorphous thing we can't really, it's a noun. It's just a thing, and we all happen to be in it. But living is a verb. Living is an action. Living is this active thing that happens. So people say life this and life that. But really, the only thing that matters is living. And I got to tell you, and it won't, you'll agree with me, I know. Carl Wharton was a master of living. Master of living. And I learned a lot from the man. And I told him so the last time I saw him. And I told him, this dying's hard business, isn't it, Carl? And he seemed relieved that somebody noticed. I had done that with my dad, and it made a big difference. And so that I had learned. You don't just pretend something's not happening, because it's the hardest work that you might ever do. And he appreciated that, And I said, I'm still learning from you. I'm watching you go through this, and I'm still learning from you. Carl was the brother that I never did have. I always wanted a brother. And finally, 30 years ago, I found one. And he made me feel like part of the family. I mean, I know all these people, right? I know all these people, and some of you too. Yes, you. And Carl and I shared a love of music. And while it was harder for him to accept something I offered, it was very easy for him to offer. And so he did. We agreed on a lot of things. We disagreed on a few things, not too many. But he told me to look deeper at some things that I thought I knew, and I learned more in terms of musically, And he's the one who said, you got to listen to this particular Miles Davis album. You got to get it. You got to listen to this live recording, of this Southern rock band. You got to do that, And so that's the thing, isn't it? Living, that's the thing. Life is going to go on whether we're in it or not. But living is our piece of it, each of us. And Carl taught us all so much about living. And I see you nodding, and I know you know what I mean. I got here last night really, really late. Had some little bit of trouble on the road and so on and so forth. But anyway, I drove down from Kentucky. And I got here, and I tell you what, it's a sight that y'all are familiar with probably. I drove up there, got to Thousand Pines, all the lights were on, and not a damn soul awake. Not a one. And I did what I've always known to do for 30 years. I went in through the kitchen door, right? And I found somewhere to put my head and so forth. But before I did all that, I went out on the porch. You see, that's my favorite porch in the world. I've always said a porch makes a house. That's something I really, really believe in. But that, and Claire knows it, and Carl knew it, that's my favorite porch in the whole world. It's better than my porch at home. It's just the greatest porch, which has a lot to do with the things that have happened there. But also it's a great porch. And so it was just me, and everybody else was, resting and sleeping and not to be seen. And I went out, and I didn't hear, Kay! And that's the first thing I noticed. And then I burned one with Carl and drank a little bourbon with him. Had a little red stripe. Everything but listen to music, because I didn't want to wake everybody else up. But, it's always playing in here. So I had that time on the porch, all by myself, but he's everywhere I look. He's everywhere I look. He's here. He's in every one of you that I see. If you're here, then I'm seeing Carl, today. And so I just sat out there for a little while. I sat in the place on the swing that he last sat when I last saw him, where I kissed him on the cheek, told him that I loved him, and good luck. And I sat there, and I just sort of did some thinking. And I think in that thinking, I was also doing some living related to the living that Carl taught us all how to do. He was a friend of mine. He was a brother. And I loved him. And I miss him. And if you're here, you feel the same way I do. So let's live. Let's do the living part of life. Can we?
Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Ingham. I don't know how this thing works. Can you all hear me without this? Yes. I'll yell. This family is a testimony to that man. And I wish I had gotten to know him when he was young. I met him 23 years ago. I think we could have gotten into some good trouble together. But when I first moved here 23 years ago, I was opening the coffee house. And Carl met me on a Saturday. He was on the way to Benton's soccer game and rented me a house. After that, he became kind of a regular around the coffee house. He would sit at the round table with George, and we'd talk politics or sports or whatever, tell lies, whatever. Carl became a real regular there and a part of the coffee house. And I remember him pulling up in his old blue blazer and opening the door and letting the dogs out. He never believed in tethering his dogs. One would take off to the Cowans to see Janet. One would run into the coffee house or down the road. So he was told by the authorities that he had put his dogs on a leash. So the next morning he pulls up to the coffee house, opens the door. Zeke runs down. Taj runs up the street, dragging their leashes behind them. He knew how to follow the law. But I didn't really get to know Carl that well until about 10 years ago when I became part of Thousand Pines. And I saw Carl every day. And I started to see how his passions, everything was a passion to him. He loved his family, first of all. He could talk all day long about his family. These grandkids, are you kidding? I bet I know more about you than you do. Carl, the last few years, I think those trips to the beach, that he would come back from those trips, just full of life and telling the stories about what all went on with the grandkids. But Carl took everything serious. I mean, it was a passion for him. His family was a passion. His friends, he loved his friends. You can see it out here. I'm sure many of you have been the recipient of a smoked breast, turkey breast, or a pork loin, or fried turkey. He was just that kind of person. He loved to cook, but he didn't love to cook for himself. He wanted to do it for other people. And that's what I always noticed about Carl. What he was doing was never about Carl. I can't remember a thing that was ever just about Carl. He loved this town. He worked tirelessly for this town. He was on the planning board. And whenever he went to a meeting, Carl was prepared. He had done his homework. He was very serious. There was no frivolity about his job as his position as on the planning board. He was just that kind of person. He took everything very, very serious. It was not seriously, it was a passion. He had passion for the things he loved. He loved that business, Thousand Pines, and I'm just happy to be able to be part of it and try to carry it on to the best I can in Carl's honor. My wife will tell you, she, every day, Becky, sitting right over here, every day when he would leave the office, he would stop and tell her thank you. And if he forgot and got out the door, he'd come back and tell her thank you. And Carl was also, what I found out about him is what a fighter that man was. I saw the last 4 years take place. He never, ever whined. Not one time do I ever remember him whining. He was the most unique man I've ever met. It's been a pleasure to get to know him and his family, and I'm proud to be here. And thank you all for being here.
Wow. Look at this amazing crowd of people here today to honor my daddy. For those 2 or 3 of you who don't know me, I'm Jessie Wharton, Carl's eldest. I'm also a teacher, and a former camp counselor can see that we've all been seated for a while listening, maybe crying, maybe laughing, definitely smiling. So now I'm going to ask for some interaction from all of you. First, if you have known Carl for 5 years or more, please stand. If you have known Carl for 10 years or more, please stay standing. 20 years. 30 years. 40 years. 50 years. Another wow. The number of you standing who've been friends with Carl for so many years is a testament to the kind of friend he was. And notice I didn't go past 50 years. You see, Dad's parents and sister and most of his family died years ago. But he never felt familyless, because he was also a proud, proud member of the Connors family. My mom's family. He loved to tell stories about how Mom's parents disapproved of him because he was a plumber and a hippie with long hair and a beard and didn't quite fit the picture of an ideal husband for their Alabama Country Club raised Converse graduate daughter. How they made him be the bartender at the family Christmas Eve party. Gave him razors and a toy car radio from Sonny King Ford for gifts. And were mortified by all the hippies at their wedding, which was actually here in Tryon before they moved here at Pinecrest Inn. But they, like all of us here, grew to love Carl because he was genuine. He was Carl. He never tried to be more or less than that. A man with a huge heart who wouldn't hesitate to go out of his way to help a friend, who loved his family fiercely. In fact, my parents would say that my Nana, Claire's mama, Evie, came around to really loving Carl after I was born, and she went in to check on me, but Daddy was already there, butt-ass naked, holding me and soothing me back to sleep. She saw the future and saw a daddy who would always be there when his baby needed him. Okay, another participation opportunity for you. Please stand if you went to Wofford. All right, we're missing Copeland. You know, it's all men because then Wofford was still all male. So now if you went to Converse, will you please also stand? Yeah. Again, just another testament to lifelong friends. When I was choosing which college to attend, Dad told me that he chose Wofford because he knew if he went to Carolina, he'd probably, and we mean North Carolina, he'd probably party too much and flunk out. While in high school in Smithfield, he sometimes went to frat parties at Carolina and was self-aware enough to know that a small school was right for him. As a father, Dad encouraged Benton and me to choose whatever college we felt was right for us, whatever path was right for us. He would talk us through the decisions, asking questions to help guide our decision-making rather than dictating what he thought was best. However, it was clear his top preference for me when as soon as the acceptance letter arrived from Chapel Hill, he emailed me the Carolina Fight song. All right, Ian, help me with this. I'm a Tar Heel born, I'm a Tar Heel bred, and when I die, I'm a Tar Heel dead. In all honesty, it was really the basketball tickets he wanted. In fact, he got season tickets to Clemson basketball for years just because it was the closest ACC team, and we'd be the only ones in Carolina blue surrounded by a sea of orange and purple. In fact, many of you here today went to those games with Daddy. One of my favorite, more recent memories was, I think it was in 2017, and Daddy, Holden, and I went to see Clemson-Carolina game at Clemson. And driving there along the back roads of South Carolina 14 and 11 was just the most breathtaking sunset. Okay, another question for you. Stand if Carl ever pissed you off. Oh, be honest. I'm sure some of us are probably wanting to stand on our tiptoes for emphasis. Daddy was unfeigned. He was honest to the bone. If he thought something should be a certain way, he was unafraid to say so. Over and over. And then in a different way. And then again. He was passionate, to say the least. Whether it was for the barbecue festival, or his family, or the zoning in Tryon, or politics, or getting things just right for a property owner or buyer. Sometimes his passion even got quoted in the Tryon Daily Bulletin, back when it was daily. My favorite, or most embarrassing, depending on my mood, was when he was objecting to the plans of a new Tryon Federal Bank building and was quoted saying that the architectural design was as exciting as artificial insemination. Yep, that was Carl. I can't say I always understood why he felt so strongly about certain things, but his willingness to stand up and say the unpopular position, to put it out there, and put in the work to make his community better, like creating ball fields in those floodplains along Scrivens Road, which are still there today. That was one of the most important lessons he taught me. The other most important lesson he taught me was simply kindness. Everyone here knows that Carl never met a stranger. In fact, stand if you call Carl a friend because he randomly started a conversation with you, or when you cross paths or for work or whatever, his genuine curiosity about his life and the way he struck up conversation quickly turned you into friends. You can stand, Everett. Yeah. That's what I thought. Once during my teenage years, we were driving through Tryon and passed someone we didn't know. Dad smiled and waved, and I didn't. I'm sure it may come as a surprise to you that I was moody and not always pleasant teenager. Anyway, Dad pulled over after we passed, pulled over on the side of the road. We were on Braywick. And he turned to me and he said, "I will not raise a snob. You wave and smile and show kindness to other people in your community. It doesn't matter if you know them." Another time he'd come to visit me at boarding school and we were in the elevator and another girl got on. Daddy smiled and said hello. We went up a couple floors and then she got off. Dad turned to me and said, "When someone comes into your space, you acknowledge them. Show kindness." How much better would our world, our country, be if we all did that? Now, stand if you ever had the privilege of Carl's hospitality. Yep. His turkeys or invitations to our home or for a beer or to share his moonshine. Again, that's what I thought. When I posted Dad's obituary on Facebook, I received so many heartfelt comments from literally across the world. The summers I was a camp counselor at Tonawanda, on our weekends off, I would bring like 15 or so fellow counselors, most of whom were international, and had nowhere to go for the weekend. We'd go to my parents' house, and Dad would barbecue ribs and have lots of food, and we would hang out drinking on the porch and sleep on all available surfaces. Then we'd wake up to a breakfast he had made for us all before helping drive us back up the mountain. So many of those women wrote to tell me how much they remembered and appreciated being welcomed into our home and taken care of, especially as they were feeling so homesick. All of Benton and my friends can attest to that treatment, to being welcome, fed, and listened to, because as much as Carl liked to talk, he also listened. He asked questions because he really was curious about others' lives and experiences. He really did care. So we all know Carl liked to talk a lot. My only regret is that I didn't record Dad's stories. That my boys won't hear his voice sharing so many different stories from his life, or stories from other people's lives that he liked to tell, because, as I've already established, he liked to talk and he was really interested in people. So now, please stand if you have a Carl story. And I want you to keep standing, because I'm asking you to share those stories. There's a videographer here, a notebook on the table over there. Please, please share those stories so that we and our children can know them too. And don't stop there. Tell your stories to your children and to your grandchildren and to your friends. Ask your parents and grandparents and friends their stories. You know, storytelling crosses all cultures and continents and centuries. Carl Wharton loved a good story. In his memory, keep those stories alive.
I have countless memories of Carl. And as I look out on all the people gathered here, I know that my memories only scratch the surface of the person he was. I hope that we take this opportunity to remember him, to tell those stories about how Carl affected our lives. More though, I hope that we can take the lessons we learned from Carl, that we can use these memories and to do and be what I think Carl wanted from every single one of us. To be the very best version of ourselves that we can be. Carl was in so many ways a legend. Legends, though, are stories from the past. Good stories, ridiculous stories, amazing stories, but stories from the past. I hope that Carl is so much more than stories from the past. Legend is great, but legacy is better. It is my hope that Carl will always be so much more than a memory to all of us. It is my hope that his life, his lessons, his love have a profound impact on all of our lives. It is my hope that the legacy of Carl Wharton continues in every single one of us. Experience joy. Pay attention. Be the best version of yourself that you can be. Show up. Laugh. Love. These are the lessons that Carl Wharton taught me and will always be with me. This is why Carl's legacy is greater than his legend. Carl, we love you and we miss you. but we know that your legacy will carry on through your beautiful family and your incredible friends. Thank you, Carl, and God bless you. And I think as Carl would want us to do, let's go have fun. But before we eat, we need to go ahead and bless this food, so let us pray. Awesome God, thank you for this day. Thank you for the opportunity to gather with friends and family to celebrate the life of our dear and beloved Carl Wharton. We ask that you bless us with your presence, that you provide us with the grace and the things that we need to celebrate his love and his life. We ask that you be with us, that you allow Carl to watch over us as we honor him and love him tonight. We ask that you bless this food, all the people that were involved in making it, from the root to the fruit. We ask that you be with all of those people, be with us, so that we may live in your will and do the best that we can to be good examples of loving people in your creation. And in your name we pray. Amen.
Sally was married to Bimbo. We were still in stories about Bimbo doing
I got, we wrote that song.
Second album.
I was very, very blessed to have Carl, period. But also to have a father who cherished so many friends so deeply. And I got a few of them up here. I'll introduce on my right, on the cello, my very, very good friend, my brother, Mr. Billy Jack. Bill, because he's an architect, but we call him the old Billy Jack dog. To my left, my brother from another mother, Mr. Brandon Archer, the guitar, and the original campfire reverence. This being a portion of what we call the campfire reverence. And on the far left, my other brother from another mother, Mr. Bobby Miller, on the mandolin. Thank you, guys. All right, if you knew my father, then you knew he loved the Allman Brothers. And if you knew me, then you knew I loved Widespread Panic. And my dad loved nothing more than listening to me tell these stories about all the times me and my wife would go and see this band. So the first one was a Greg Allman original. The second one was a Michael Hauser instrumental. And this is a Bob Dylan song because my dad had Bob Dylan's book of art and poetry in the bookshelf where all the kids' books were kept, which I thought was a nice touch. So swift, the rain won't lift. The gates won't close, the railings close. Get your mind up with the time now, y'all, 'cause you ain't going nowhere. Saying, ooh, gonna ride behind. Tomorrow's the day and my bride's gonna come. Oh, Lord, we gon' fly down here. Well, I don't care how many letters you send. The morning came, the morning came. Pick up the money, pack up your tin top, 'cause you ain't going nowhere. Said, ooh, gonna ride behind. Tomorrow's the day when my bride's gonna come. Oh, we gon' fly. Yeah, go ahead, Bobby. Substitutes. You can strap me to that tree with boots, y'all, 'cause I ain't going nowhere. Said, ooh, we'll ride behind. I will lose the day that my bride's on come. Oh, we gon' fly every step of the way. Geckos called me, could not keep all of his kittens supplied with sleep. We're gonna climb that hill, no matter how steep. We're gonna get up to it. Said, ooh, gonna ride behind. Tomorrow's the day when the bride's gonna come. Oh, we gonna fly down, down in the Egypt. Said down the hallway, right behind. Tomorrow's the day when the bride's gonna come.
in this world was to keep my love alive. Oh, I had to keep my love alive. Ooh, keep my love alive. Ooh, I know. Spotlights, your silver trophy shine, and all you got, my lord, you must get high. A lot more than money, you need more than to survive. You gotta keep your love alive. Keep your love alive. Come on now, keep your love alive.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank y'all for listening. Thank you to my brothers for coming up and playing with me. We got little Jimmy and a whole nother troop of Tryon Knights gonna group for us. So thank you.
I heard they pronounce it Tryon.
Tryon.
Throw my ticket out the window. Throw my suitcase out there too. Throw my troubles out the door. I don't need them anymore. 'Cause tonight I'll be staying here with you. Should have left this town this morning. There was more than I could do. Oh, your love comes on so strong. I waited all day long for tonight. I'll be staying here with you. Is it really any wonder, Lord, that a stranger might receive? You cast your spell, I went under. Well, it's so difficult to leave. too. There's a poor boy on the street, let him have my seat, 'cause tonight I'll be staying here with you. A stranger might receive. You cast your spell, I went under. Found it so difficult to leave. Throw my ticket out the window. I'm not worried, I got it covered. Throw my suitcase out there too. Throw my troubles out the door. I don't need them anymore. 'Cause tonight I'll be staying here with you. Yeah.
Nice job, Vinny. Cousin Jimmy.
There's too many of you crying. And brother, 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 oh, there's too many of you dying. You know we've got to find a way to bring some love in here today. Father, Father, we don't need to escalate. You know war is not the answer, 'cause only love can conquer hate. Yeah, you know we've got to find a way to bring some love in here today. Picket line, brother, picket sign, brother, don't push me, brother, brutality, brother, talk to me, brother, you can see
any court of y'all. Oh, everyone says that we are wrong. Oh, who are they to tell us? Simply because our hair is long. Well, you know, we got to find a way to bring some love in here today. Picket line, sister, picket sign, sister, don't punish me, sister, brutality, sister, oh, talk to me, sister, oh, you can see what's going on, 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 John Howard? Oh, yeah. Everybody says that we are wrong. John Howard wrote on the guitar. Oh, are they to tell us? Simply because our hair is long. You know we got to find a way to bring some love in here. Picket line, brother, picket sign, brother, don't punish me, brother, brutality, brother, talk to me, talk to me. Oh, you can see what's going on, what's going on, what's going on, what's going on, what's going on. I wanna know, wanna know what's going on, what's going on. Why don't you what's going on, what's going on, what's going on? Whoa. Yeah, that's what's going on. God, Tim. Yeah. I'd like to introduce the group. Vinnie Corda on the saxophones, plural and flute. Elena Brevette down there on the bass guitar, basso. Mike Caruth on the drums. John Haverroot, he's back here behind me. On the guitar, wonderful player. And I'm your friend, Jim Peterman. We are the Basement Bunch. That's what we are. We are a bunch. Some love, give me some love, give me some love, give me some love, yeah, give me some love every day. Come on, baby, look what happened to you. And I'm so glad you made it. Oh, I'm so glad you made it, baby. Give me some love, give me some love, give me some love, give me some love every day. Every day. John Howard was wailing on the guitar. Yeah. So keep it up, quench my desire. I'll be by your side forevermore. Where you love, keep lifting me, keeps on lifting it higher, higher and higher. Where your love keeps on lifting, keeps on lifting me higher, higher. This devil never back this way.